Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of JeremyCraft. I'm recording this pretty much right after the end of the last episode. I've just spent a little bit of time laying out where I think the buildings are going to go. At the moment, each one of these sections is the same size. That's not going to be the case when we actually build these buildings. They're all going to be different sizes. But I wanted to lay out some markers here just to get a rough idea of the scale that we're working with. So I'm going to fly up really quick to show you guys. This is Main Street here, and this is the rough size of all the buildings. I wanted to do this before we started just so I can see how much space each one is going to take up, because now when we head into the creative world to start planning some of these builds, we have a rough idea of what the foundation size should be. So I'll start with a 9x9, which is what this size is here, and then I'll build up the building and make it, bigger or smaller based on the building's needs. I've left a little bit of space down on this end in case the buildings all end up being a little bit bigger than they are here, so they can push all the way over here and have still plenty of room. As you can see, I had to move the nether portal since it was like right in the middle of Main Street. And I've got a plan to build my nether tunnel down here. So I'll drop down here. And then over here. So this lines up roughly with where the nether portal is currently. And when I make the actual portal, I'll embed it in the wall here and make this whole cave section look nice and natural. And then you just fly out when you want to get back. It's a little bit more cumbersome than hopping in and out of the portal over there, so I'll probably leave this here just for a little while we're doing some of the bulk work, and then when I'm satisfied with the amount of progress we're making, I'll move it down there just because it won't be as big a deal going back up and down. So as you can tell by the music, we're going to be focusing a lot on the Old West Town this episode. Getting some more detailed plans for some of the builds, even building some of them up in the creative world, and maybe, if we're lucky, by the end of today, having one of the buildings in place. But before we do any more work on the Old West Town, I want to spend some time at the beginning of this episode talking about this series and some of my plans for the future. Because I've been thinking a lot about this series recently, especially now that we've gotten some work done on the Old West Town. Because if you remember at the beginning of this series, I laid out some basic plans for what I wanted to accomplish with this series. But now that the possibility of finishing this town is on the horizon, I started to think forwards about what the future of this series will be. Because once we're done this, we have nothing planned. There's nothing left really for us to do other than things like the Nether Hub, which I'm going to be working on while we're doing the town, and may even be finished before we finish the town. And I've come up with something that I'm really excited about. So while I work on the design of some of these buildings, I'll do a little bit of a time-lapse chat. I've had a really good time working on some of these villages, and as I've been working, I've been getting more ideas for other types of villages we could build. And the idea kind of hit me. I'm going to spend this series moving between major village projects. Every village will be different, it'll have its own theme, its own build palette, and its own lore. I've already got a couple ideas that I'll list in a minute, but whenever we finish a project, I'll do a little poll with you guys in the comments to decide which of the villages we'll work on next, and then we'll pick a location and that will become the new project for a while. So I've got a couple different ideas. I'll list some of them off to give you an idea of what I'm kind of talking about. One idea I had was to build a more medieval-inspired village, so it'll be like a castle surrounded by a village with something like a lord's manor in the center, and along with that will come smaller projects like we'll build a blacksmith's house and a granary and that kind of stuff, so that it feels like a more realistic medieval village. So that'll be the castle project. I have a less fleshed out idea for an underwater village, which would be essentially a series of domes where villagers would live and move between different pods underwater, all with glass ceilings and glass tubes. I think that could be a really interesting build, especially if we find a way to integrate it in such a way where it feels like the villagers are interacting with the ocean below. Maybe we'll build some crystals into the side of a ravine or something and make it seem like they're doing some sort of underwater mining. Another idea I had that I was really excited about was a fantasy-inspired underground cave village. So this would be a huge cavern opening with small tunnels going in different directions leading to different builds, maybe an underground forge that uses lava, deep mining tunnels, and this one would have a focus on gems that would be built into the side of the cave that were clearly being harvested by the villagers inside, with mine carts moving around the outside, constantly moving, making the village feel very active. I think if we build that one under a mushroom biome, we could avoid lighting it up and make it into a very dark, enchanted sort of looking cave. So that's another one I'm very excited about. And then finally, my last idea was much smaller, probably be one of the first ones we do. I want to redecorate and finish off the walled village that we have, the desert one that we currently use as our trading hub. I think we could do some really cool stuff with these village projects. And as we're working along these projects, if any of you have any ideas for things like names for the villages, I'd love to hear them. I absolutely love getting feedback from you guys. So for things like the desert village, if any of you come up with a name that fits a sort of deserty, Egyptian, or Arabic sort of theme, I would love to name the city after that. So if any of you have any ideas for things like that, please leave a comment. I read every comment and I love getting your guys' feedback. And then one last little thing as we finish off the time lapse. This one's not super important. If any of you want me to name an animal or a villager after you, or even if you just have a name that you like, that you think would be fun for one of the animals or villagers, leave a comment down below. Obviously, I'll have final say on any of the names I actually use, and I do ask that you don't choose anything inappropriate, but I think it'd be pretty fun and add a little bit more personality to some of the animals and villagers that we have on our island and in the villages. But I apologize, I've been rambling for a really long time, so let's get back to the video. Hey guys, welcome back from the time lapse. We're in my creative world, having just finished the buildings that will be on the main street. None of these buildings have interiors yet. I'm going to design those once we have the buildings built in the actual world. I just wanted to get the basic outline of all these buildings built up now before I do any work in the actual world, so I can tell where the buildings are going to go and how much space they're going to take up. Before we can transfer this over to the actual world though, we need to decide which of these buildings are going to be serving what purpose. I'm pretty happy with how all these buildings turned out. I built them all in one long session, and by the end of it I was starting to feel much more comfortable with the aesthetic of the buildings and what I was sort of hoping to achieve with the look. And once I have an idea of which buildings would look best next to each other, I can start actually building these on the plateau. One more thing really quick before we head back to the regular world. I took a note out of Wells Knight's book and edited the texture for note blocks so that they look like crates. I thought this would add a lot of options, not just for this Old West town build, but for all builds in the future, for adding a little bit of variety and realism to some of the areas. Oh, I almost forgot. One of the other things I worked on really quickly was I got a set of letter banners. As you can see in my inventory here, the idea is that when we are walking down Main Street, all of the main buildings will have these sort of signs indicating what they are. I thought it would just be a nice addition to make it a little bit more realistic, because you can't really tell what any of these buildings are from the outside, so I thought this was a good way to do it. Alrighty guys, we are back in our world. I've been putting in a little bit of work organizing the town and calculating how much material we're going to need. I'm going to show first really quickly a photoshopped image that I made to show off what the town is going to look like, what the two sides of the street are going to look like. As well, I've done some calculations on Excel to figure out how much of each material we're going to need. Specifically, I calculated how many stacks of each type of wood we're going to need. I'll put up a quick image so you can see the amounts. We're going to need 19 stacks of birch, 22 stacks of jungle, 15 stacks of spruce wood, 17 stacks of oak, and 10 stacks of bone blocks. Now those amounts don't account for the roofs. We're going to need a lot of blackstone. I don't know how we're going to get as much as we need, but hopefully we'll just be able to go into the nether and start mining through the walls, and maybe we'll get some nice blackstone deposits. So I'll worry about that last. But for now, we're just going to have to go on a bit of a grind for a while, collecting all of the wood we're going to need. I want to try and get as much of the grind work done at the beginning as possible so that when it comes time to do the final time-lapse, I can just build all of the buildings at once. So I'm going to time-lapse me chopping down trees for a really long time, and I'll get back to you guys when we've made some progress towards our totals. We're going to take a really quick break from the time-lapse because I need to share with you guys a moment of absolute smooth-brained buffoonery. When I started this time-lapse, I carefully counted how much of each material I was going to use. I showed you guys that nice spreadsheet I'd made where I'd broken down each material based on how much I would need for the buildings in the test world. And after about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of chopping oak, I was starting to think, man, this is taking a really long time. Like, this is going to take me multiple days probably of just grinding to get all this wood. And then it hit me that I was counting logs, not planks. I got more than I would need because I ended up giving up on the bone meal and just chopping down that whole section of trees that were over here before. I had written down that I needed 17 stacks, and this is 17 and a bit. And it wasn't until I had finished doing this that I realized I don't even need close to this amount. I need like 4 stacks of logs. I'm glad I realized this before I got the rest of the wood, because I would have been incredibly bummed out if I had gotten to the end and realized that I'd spent 7 hours gathering wood when I only needed to spend maybe an hour. So I'm going to keep going with the time-lapse, and the second half of this time-lapse is probably going to be much shorter than the first half. Alrighty guys, and we're done. The second half of that definitely took much less time than the first, partially because the trees that we were cutting down were mostly the 2x2 trees, which give you a lot more wood per sapling. So we're all good on materials now. All that's left to do is plan out the foundations, make sure everything's lined up properly, and then we can start building. So I'm going to do some planning, try and organize my buildings and where everything's going to go, and then once everything's set up, I'm going to start building the buildings, and hopefully we can get some of these down pretty quickly. Hey guys, welcome back from the time-lapse. I genuinely cannot believe how much we were able to get done in this episode. I thought maybe we were going to get a building or two at most done, but the fact that we were able to get every single one down in the world is pretty exciting. Now obviously none of these have interiors, and none of them have the banners, and some of the details and stuff are missing. And obviously this main street is not going to look like this. I'm going to use the same sort of method that I used to make natural paths, to make a varied, sort of worn out and like muddy looking sort of main street, like it's been traversed a lot, you know? And then obviously the main thing is that next episode we're definitely going to be making the interiors of a lot of these buildings, hopefully all of them, but it'll depend on how much we're able to do. So hopefully by the end of the next episode we'll have all the banners up, all of the interiors done, the main street done, and we can start working on a little bit of extra lore builds. So I mentioned in one of the previous episodes that I wanted to have a warehouse here, somewhere at the back. What that's actually going to sort of transform into is that I want it to be a storage area for a mine. In between time lapses, I've been working on a texture for a crystal that I'm going to use to tie together all of the different villages that we build. So each village that we build in this world is going to be mining the same valuable crystal. I've made a texture for it. I'll show it to you guys in just a second in my creative world. Alrighty, really quickly, these are the crystal textures that I'm using. So I have replaced the purple glazed terracotta, the purple stained glass panes and block, and the shroom lights that you find in the new Crimson and Warped Forests. We have one that is a light source, which is great because I want this crystal to sort of glow sometimes. We have two transparent versions, which really look like a see-through crystal. And we have a solid block that looks more like this, but like kind of inert, that you can use to texture it up and make it look a little bit more natural maybe. And the idea is that these crystals will grow in these sort of formations like this, as sort of like a deposit, these massive crystals that get broken down. Down here I've shown a very quick example of like how the crystals might be growing in like a cave, if you were to imagine this is all natural stone. But yeah, this will be the crystal that the villages are all spreading up around. Anytime a deposit of this shows up in the world, a village sort of pops up on top of it, and depending on what the biome is and how the landscape around the area looks, it'll all influence how the village ends up looking. So for example, the village that we built in the Mesa had an Old West theme. The village that's mining the underwater ravine will all be built underwater, etc., etc. And essentially each one of these villages is going to pop up sort of underneath or over top of a deposit of this crystal and is going to be actively mining it. So the warehouse that we build at the back here will be like a storage area for the crystal. There will be maybe like an elevator system right here, some like wooden lifts, and then either in this ravine here, we'll have it sticking out of the walls that they're mining, or we'll make a sort of formal mining pit right here. I kind of like the idea of using the ravine. It'll fit very well into a future build when we do the underwater cave, because they're going to be using a ravine as well. But I thought I would mention that really quickly to give you guys an idea of sort of what my ideas are for the rest of this town build, because it's not just going to be these two sort of strips. This is just the main sort of attraction, the main set of buildings. But that stuff's all going to happen in future episodes because unfortunately we are out of time for this week. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you guys have any questions or suggestions for things you'd like to see us build in this series, please feel free to comment. I read every comment and I love hearing your guys' suggestions. That aside, thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.